Hey, good afternoon, everybody. This is Jeff Besson with Intuilab. I'll be your host for the next, 45 minutes as we dive deep into the world of data tracking and analytics. Some of you might know me from the introductory webinar. In fact, this webinar does presuppose a little bit of knowledge about Intuiface. I'll talk about some things that are introduced in the introductory webinar. I won't explain them here, but both this and the other are recorded, so it's never too late to catch up. Let's talk about data tracking. Here we have an overview of the Intuiface data tracking feature. On the left is a representation of all the players in the field. You might have one player, you might have 1,000. The idea is that each individually is collecting the data you specify, and later in this webinar I'll demonstrate how to do that. But right now, take it for granted that player is collecting a lot of data. You might have one player, you might have 1,000. All of that information is being pushed from those players up to the data tracking hub. Under the covers, that's Amazon S3. It's not us. It's very scalable, very reliable, but formally we call it the data tracking hub, and its job is to collate all of the information collected by your players. Once it's on the hub, we then make it available for analysis across a variety of platforms so you can analyze it. We don't analyze data. We enable you to specify what to collect and then make it available for analysis through all of these different platforms. Broadly speaking, you're doing this because of the beauty of interactive content. You know what people are interested in because they touched it. And you can use that insight to refine what you show when you show it and to refine your understanding of your audience. This is unlike static signage where you have no idea if it's working other than through inference. And inference isn't necessarily accurate. So with the data tracking feature of Intuiface, you know exactly what people are doing and how often they do it and under what circumstances they do it because the information is right there. And we collate that information across all of your players so it's in a single location available for you to filter through it, sort it, graph it, table it, and gain insight about your audience, insight about the installation, and making sure you do an effective job of using our technology to tell a story, promote a product, impart information, whatever. And it works simply like this. Players generate the data, it's collected in the hub makes it available to you for analysis. That analysis could be just directly in Excel. You can download data directly into Excel. You could push it to a Google Analytics property. That's what Google calls their projects. So Google Analytics, historically, that's for websites, but about 1.5 years ago, they accommodated the collection of mobile application data, and we're essentially treating Intuiface experiences like a mobile app. And you're able to push data tracking information to a Google Analytics property and then analyze it as you would of any other app or website. Segment is a middleman. They take data and push it to over 200 analysis, marketing automation, and data warehousing platforms. So we pretty much support everybody on the planet through Segment. Mixpanel, that's a specific third party enabling data analysis. We could have worked with Mixpanel through Segment, but we have a dedicated Segment Mixpanel connector just because it's a good reference point. REST, so there are platforms that pull in data. Right? We're pushing to Google Analytics, we're pushing to Segment, we're pushing to Mixpanel. You might have a platform that wants to pull data, and you can pull data from the data tracking hub using a REST-based web services query, and we support that. Finally, maybe you just want us to put the data in a database. It's a database on your premises, maybe it's a database we host for you, but we can do that as well. It's just a warehouse, and you do with the data what you wish, so it's all up to you. Again, this is a high-level view. We're going to jump into all the details a little bit later, but this is it. It's pretty simple. All right, next level of detail. We'll start with what kind of information and events you can capture. The majority of the events you're going to capture and record information about are events that you specify. In fact, there's very little that Intuiface will automatically capture. That could have been a nightmare, right? If Intuiface is just proactively capturing everything just in case, it would be a firestorm of data points. It's not how it works. For the most part, they're custom, but we do automatically identify when the experience has started and stopped, and you can ask Intuiface, it's an option, you can ask it to identify whenever a scene has been entered or left. Those can be done automatically. Everything is done manually. I'll show you how to do it. In addition to some automatic events, there is some automatic information that's captured for both automatic events and for custom events. For example, the name of the device, the operating system on the device, the version of Intuiface, the Intuiface product, the version of Intuiface, the timestamp. This kind of information is globally collected, whether it's an automatic event or a manual event. Either way, we're going to collect this information. Why? Because there's a good chance you might want to use some of this information for filtering. We don't make you tell us to collect this information. We just do it automatically. When you create a data point, remember, most data points you create, you've created explicitly. It's not done automatically. There's an event. You want to record the fact that the event happened. You want to record information about that event. You want to give that event context. That becomes the parameters of that data point. And you can have as many parameters as you want. Let's say that you want to record whenever a video was watched. The event was the video was watched. The first parameter might be the name of the video. The second parameter might be the weather outside. The third parameter might be the movie theater down the street. All of these things could give context. All of them could be parameters of a single data point, in this case, video watched. You could have as many as you like. The graphic I just showed you, identifying all of the players, pushing all of their data to the data tracking hub, implies a network connection. That players can communicate with this Amazon-based database. So what happens if there isn't an internet connection? Well, the good news is that Intuiface, if it cannot find the data tracking hub, will store the data locally, waiting for a network connection to be established. And as long as there's disk space, we'll keep caching that data, waiting for an internet connection to be established. So you don't have to be online all the time to use the data tracking feature. Sessions. This is an important point, but let me spend a moment explaining it. And a good way to think about it is in terms of a website. Whether you know Google Analytics specifically or not, you probably get the idea that there's value in monitoring what visitors are doing on your website. Right? How did they come in? What page did they come in on? Where did they go next? Where did they go third? How long were they there? This sort of thing. As you can imagine, it's important to distinguish one visitor from another. Because if you don't, it's just a mess of interactions. You have no idea about cause and effect. You have no idea about order. You don't know what dwell time is. You need to differentiate one visitor from another. And Google and Bing and whoever offers web analytics does that through the notion of a session. Each unique visitor has a unique session, and you can differentiate one session from another. There's obvious value to differentiating sessions. It means you can differentiate people. So obviously it would be nice to differentiate sessions with Intuiface as well. And you can specify when a new session has begun or ended. The trick is there's no way to know it's a new session. There's no explicit way. If on my website, I know it's a unique person because I know they have a unique IP address. I know the address of their PC. I know it's different from everybody else, so I can distinguish their session based on that information. People at your touch screen kiosk in the mall don't have an IP address. So how do you know that that finger touch is the same person or a different person? And thus, how do you know if it's a new session or the same session? Well, unless you have ESP, you don't know for sure. But what you can do is create scenarios that sort of imply it. For example, you might have an inactivity timer, which says that after X number of seconds, reset. And when you reset, the next event's a new session. That's pretty reliable, right? I mean, it's possible somebody just stood around for a while and the inactivity timer kicked in, but it's really the same person, but likely it's not. So that's a pretty good way to distinguish one session from another. Another one could be using a button. that says Start Over. And you assume that whenever the Start Over button is pressed, that the next action is a new session. Again, is it foolproof? No, but it's likely it's a new session. So you do need to account for this. But when you account for it, you can tell us this is a new session and group subsequent data points appropriately. The data is just text. All the data point information is just text, so it's not big to begin with. But we do recognize that your deployment might be in a low bandwidth environment or an environment where you're paying for that bandwidth and data transfer. So we do compress it. And because it's text, it compresses pretty tightly, so it's like 98% compression rate. So we do promise that we're going to minimize our footprint should that be an issue in terms of bandwidth or cost. Finally, and this is one of the beauties of Intuiface, I'm its #1 fan. All the platforms. You build it in Composer, you specify data tracking the use of the data tracking feature in Composer, and it just works everywhere Player runs. You don't have to do something special for an iPad or a Chrome device. You don't have to do something quirky for Android. It just works everywhere. All 6 supported platforms, works out of the box. Pretty awesome. Let's go a little deeper. So let's talk about these parameters, right? We said unlimited parameters. Well, what kind of information could you collect? The first is probably the most obvious, which are interaction events. Video played, book read, seen, visited, video watched, whatever, right? Somebody explicitly did something, you want to record the fact that that happened. That's the pretty obvious. Very useful though, right? And it's not just what are they interested in, but also, did I make a good design? If I create an experience that's intended to have people do A, B, and C, and nobody ever does C, I need to know that because maybe it's a bad design. So tracking these interaction events isn't simply about understanding your audience, it's understanding the effectiveness of your content. But that's the obvious kind of data you can collect. A second class of information would be user information. Who did that event? Or what? I mean, it doesn't have to be a person. Maybe it's an external service, which you can do with Intuiface. It doesn't have to be a person. It could be just some third-party service that is causing things to happen in Intuiface, and you record that. But it's helpful to know, right? But let's go back to people. Maybe you have a form, or they somehow identify themselves. They swipe a badge in a card reader, something, so you know their name or the email address. Make that a parameter too. Now you don't just know what they did, but you know who did it. The third class of information is about the environment. You don't just know what they did, you don't just know who did it, but if the information is available, the weather outside, the movie down the street, the special at the restaurant next door, if that information is available, it can potentially give context to the event and to the person. It could be very interesting to know. An obvious example is, are preferences different in a retail location on a rainy day versus a snowy day versus a windy day versus a summer day? Because if it is different, you should probably be showing different things. Optimize that insight and use it to your advantage. And with Intuiface, if the information is accessible, it could be a parameter of a data point. It doesn't matter what that information is. It could be anything. Back to the right, remember, for automatic events, the parameters are predefined. Experience started and stopped, seen left or entered, those are predefined. For custom events, you can add as many parameters. You give the event your own name, whatever name you want, and you can add as many parameters as you want. And each data point can have a different number of parameters. There's just there's no restrictions anywhere. And there's no reason to be shy. Stuff data, stuff a bunch of parameters in that data point because you never know what you might need if you think it's remotely relevant. But again, remember, there is some data that we always capture, so you don't have to go out of your way to mention it. Last topic before demo, and let me go directly to a web browser, so this is a live view. 1, 2, here we go. Hopefully most of you have already registered with us, have started working with Composer, maybe you're already falling in love. If so, if you have an account, then you have access to the My Intuiface website. And here in the upper right is data tracking, so let's go to data tracking, which is comprised of two elements, a dashboard at the top and a list of connectors at the bottom. The dashboard refers to the number of data points I'm entitled to consume in a given time period. Composer can consume an unlimited number of data points, many as you want. Player is limited. It's based on a plan that you purchase, and we'll talk about plans at the end of this webinar. But you buy a plan specifying the total number of data points that can be collected across all of your players over the course of a subscription month. According to this, I'm on the free plan. I have 1,000 data points available to me, none of which have been consumed. To this point, I've only been using Composer's play mode, and I've used 45 data points over this time period. So that's the top. The bottom are the connectors. Depending on the platform I intend to use for analysis, you need to configure these connectors before you collect data. You cannot retroactively push data from the data tracking hub to some of these options. For some of these options, you have to pre-configure the connector. So let's take a quick look. With Excel, it's never too late. You can go back in time, you can pre-filter a little bit, download it directly into Excel. It's never too late. Google Analytics, yeah, you need to tell us into which property you want it to go. All we need to know is the name and the tracking ID. The tracking ID is determined by your Google Analytics property. It comes from them. You tell us the name of the property, you hit save, and that's it. And now we're going to push all the collected data to this particular property, and by the way, you can have more than one at the same time. Mixpanel, same idea, except instead of calling it, what do they call it, a tracking ID, Mixpanel calls it a token. Give us a name, give us a token, we're pushing data. You need to pre-configure it, can't go back, but once it's configured, you can walk away and I can have multiple Mixpanel projects. Segment, same idea. It's not a tracking ID or a token. They call it a write key, but it's the same concept. You create a project in Segment, you get the write key of that project, you enter it here, and now we're pushing data to your Segment project. REST, that's the pull. Remember, this isn't us pushing data to a platform. This is your platform pulling it. It's a REST-based web services query, and here you'll see a credential key that is used by the query to specify where to get the data. And then finally, if you're having us push data into a database, this needs to be pre-configured as well. We don't have one configured, so there's nothing to see here, but it's your database or something we host. This is where the connectors will be stored. So depending on the platform you're using, you're going to want to pre-configure that connector or set of connectors to make sure that all the data going to the hub is then pushed to those third-party platforms. And once that's done, you can start collecting data. Okay, now it's time for the demo. Okay, let's do the demo. Here's the scenario. We have a photo gallery and I want to keep track of all the images selected by a visitor. And there's a guest book. I want to use the data tracking feature to capture the email address and comment put in the guest book. That's what I want to do here using the data tracking feature. Step number one, I have to add the data tracking interface asset. As I mentioned at the beginning, we're going to talk about some concepts here, assuming you know what they are. For example, what's an interface asset? Don't forget, if you're unfamiliar, there's always the introductory webinar. It does review these concepts, and we'll get you up to speed. Add an interface asset, data tracking. There we go. So there's the data tracking interface asset. Just by adding it, by virtue of adding it, we will now collect in play mode or in player experience started and experience stopped. Going to happen. You don't have to tell us to do anything. Its very existence in the project means those two automatic events will happen. If I open the properties panel for this interface asset, notice the option to include scene navigation events. Scene entered, scene left, scene entered, scene left. I can choose not to use it or choose to use it, and I choose to use it. So not only will there be two data points, one for experience started, one for experience stopped, but there will be new data points every time I enter or leave a scene. All other events, all other data points are custom. You create them yourself. Let's add a button to kick things off. Here's a button. We'll make it a little easier to see. Fill it up with red. More properties panel. Text. Press me. Change the font to white. There we go. There's a more obvious button. I want this button to do two things. When I touch it, I want two things to happen. I want to navigate to the next scene. The scene called Track Interaction Events. I want to go to the next scene. And I want to record that a new data tracking session has started. Right click, add trigger. When the button is pressed and released, then first, scene-to-scene navigation, go to the scene named Track Interaction Events. Add another action, Interface Assets, Data Tracking, Start New Session. I can assign an ID, a unique ID, something that's meaningful to me, or I can leave it blank, in which case we create an automatic one, a long, randomly generated hexadecimal number, so there's no chance that two sessions have the same ID. So that's up to you. But either way, there's going to be a data point that says a new session has started with the timestamps, you know, when it started. All right, so that button does two things. Navigates to the next scene and says a new session has started. Let's go to the next scene. Here's my image gallery. There's a third webinar called Boost Your Experiences with Excel. It talks about how to create this gallery, because under the covers, this gallery is linked to a spreadsheet, an Excel spreadsheet. There's multiple images here. And what happens is that whenever I touch one of these images, up from the bottom floats this panel. Every time I touch an image in that collection up top, this panel slides into view and is filled with information about the selected image. That's what this does now. What I want to do is, in addition to having this panel slide into view, is I want to create a data point that tells me which image was selected and what was its cost. So let's do that. Scene structure panel. Right now, I know that this is where this tap action is what causes the panel to move up top with all of the text about the selected image. That's what this trigger is all about. So that's the trigger I want to use to also record the event, the data point that a photo was selected. So in addition to pre-populating that panel with text and moving it into view, I want to do one other thing. Data tracking. Log event. It's a custom event. And now I need to give it a name. Let's do photo scene. It was in the drop-down list because I've used it before. I can type anything I want. It just happens to remember, and that's what I'm using. So we have an event that will be named photo scene. Now, I could be done. I could just create a data point whose name is photo scene, but I don't know which photo. Let's use the parameters to give the photo name and the price. Add parameter, drop-down list. It remembers that I've used, we'll do artwork name. It remembers previously entered parameter names, so no harm there. I'm going to reuse it. I could type anything I want. And then using binding, we're going to grab the name from the spreadsheet. There. Again, we're using the principles of interface assets and binding. This is not the webinar to explain it. The introductory webinar does, as does the Boost Your Experiences with Excel webinar. What we're doing here is saying, when that image is tapped, not only does the panel slide into view, but we're going to create a data point named photo scene with two parameters. The first parameter is artwork name with add value. One more parameter, price. It remembers I've used price before. I'll just use that. And then we'll grab price from the data feed. And that's it. Every time an image is selected, it's going to create a data point named photo scene with two parameters, artwork name and price. All right, there's a Sign Our Guestbook button that navigates us to this scene. And here's what I'd like to do here. When this send button is pressed, I want to create a data point that contains the email address and the content. So when the send button is pressed, okay, there's already a trigger. Here it is. When the send button is pressed and released, then currently it goes to the next scene. I want to do one more thing, create a data point. Add action. Data tracking. Log event. In this case, we'll say guest book signed. I could put anything I want. It just remembers what I've used. Parameter 1, email address. And in this case, the email address is in this field, the email input asset right there. So that's where we're going to get the value from. The email address through binding, scene structure, email input, text. Okay. New parameter, comment, and that comes from the comment input text asset, binding, comment input. We need the text property, text. Okay, so now every time the send button is pressed, not only do we navigate to a new scene, but we generate a data point, name guest book signed, 2 parameters, email address, and comment. Let's go to the final scene, end of session. What I'd like to do here is end the current session. That's what I want to do. So right-click for the scene itself. When the scene has been entered, then data tracking, stop current session. See that? Now, what we don't have here is a reset or an inactivity timer or a start over, so we don't have a circle back, but at least we have a single trip through. We start the session at the beginning, we end the session here. We are ready to go into play mode, so let's do that. Play. Here's the Press Me button. Remember, the Press Me button does 2 things. It goes to the track interaction event scene, and it creates a data point, start new session. Press Me. Here's the asset grid. Remember, that's being filled from a spreadsheet. There's actually a lot of images here. Recall, when I touch an image, up will slide a panel with information, and we create a data point, photo scene, artwork name, price. This image, whoop, there it is. Artwork name, Blue Beauty and Field, price $6.50. And this image, we'll do a few here. And this image, slide around a little bit. We got zebras and hippos and what are these, leopards? Let's go to Thailand. Love this picture. We'll do this. Oops. There it is. And little monk doing his thing. One more picture. Okay, I don't know. 7 or 8 data points, right? Each image is a data point. I did about 7 or 8, I guess. Sign our guest book. Email address, jeff@besson.com. I've never seen anything like Intuiface. Give me 20 licenses. Okay. When I hit the send button, we're going to create a data point. Its name is guest book signed, 2 parameters, email address, and comment, and it goes to the next scene, 1, 2, 3, send. When the scene has been entered, then end current session. There you go. It's not hard. I understand you're new to the feature, but I hope that doesn't look hard. Frankly, the hardest concept was interface assets and binding, which is, you know, that's not data tracking. It's sort of it's not tangential. It's relevant to the use of the feature, but it's not the feature itself. Using data tracking itself should be pretty easy once you're used to it. It's not hard. Okay, so under the covers, Player's been collecting this information. Technically, Player doesn't just pump information up to the data tracking hub whenever he gets data. What it does is it creates a cache. and it periodically purges the data in that cache of the data tracking hub. So it's not constantly flooding the network. It takes between 30 seconds and a minute, I don't know, but it's sitting on the data for a period of time between 20 and 40 seconds, something like this, I'm not sure, before it pushes it to the hub. Once it gets to the hub, it takes about another minute for the hub to kind of collate everything together and make it available for analysis. So arguably, it takes about 2 minutes, give or take, for your data to be available in Excel or Mixpanel or whatever, at least that long. So if you run an experience, generate a data point, then sprint over and download an Excel spreadsheet, it's not going to be in there yet. You've got to give it a little bit of time. But remember, it's time stamped, so it's not like you're going to lose a notion of when that event occurred. It's going to be in there. We're going to look at the data. Let me make one other point here. I want to kind of drive home this notion that any accessible information could be a parameter. Some of you may know that out of the box we can pull weather from a third-party weather resource, get weather for any location. Because that information is accessible on the device, I can make weather a parameter of my interface of my data point. We have a system information interface asset that gets all that information here, not just information about the device name and the application name, but the country, the city, latitude, longitude. You can see I'm in Rockport. All this information is available, could be a parameter of a data point. Any information that's accessible can be a parameter of a data point. We support, out of the box, we have an integration with a third party named Intuiface. Intuiface uses cameras to identify age, gender, number of people, direction of movement. All right, they expose their information through an API, we can grab that information. Thus, we could not only know what they picked, but if it was a man or a woman and approximately how old they were. That would be very insightful information, right? Depending on what you want to learn about your audience. And all of this can be placed in a data point. That's how powerful this is. All right, let's take a look at the data. We'll start with Excel. Here we are on our connectors page. I'm going to refresh this because it was 45 when we first visited. See that over here? Composer generated 45. Let's refresh the page. Should be more there. We just ran play mode, so let's see. Why, yes, there is. Now there's 67 process data points. So we just generated 22 data points. Excel, I'm going to use the default. I could say particular date range, particular device, particular app. We'll just do them all. Download data points. Save. Open. Okie doke. Here they are. These early columns are those predefined parameters that are generated for all automatic and custom events. Universal timestamp, local timestamp, name of the device, name of the Intuiface app, version of the Intuiface app, any tags if player was tagged, operating system, version of the operating system, experience name, always automatically collected. Again, why? Because you might want to filter based on it. We're not going to make you tell us to record this information all the time. Excuse me, here's the session ID, and I've run this webinar twice today, so here's the morning webinar. And here's the session from the morning webinar. Here's the afternoon webinar. Right here. So here's the new session. And you can see the unique ID. Let's go back up to the top. Let's see. We have screen name, scene name, event name. So some of these events are automatic. Experience started. Let's see. Scene entered, scene left, scene entered, scene left, scene entered. So these are the automatic. And then these are the custom. Let's go down to the session we just ran. Can I move this out of the way? I want to see the header here. Let's see if I can. I can't get my mouse to work. Anyway, let's look at these the data points we've collected. Here's photo scene. And if we look across, remember, Beauty in the Field, 650, Maryland Chevy, 3350. Guestbook signed, jeff@besson.com. I've never seen anything like Intuiface, give me 20 licenses. The column titles are the names of the parameters. Those are the parameter names. Every data point can have different parameters, so it could just be column after column after column, but each data point is relevant to a particular set of columns. So this is just the raw data. There it is. We even collect time dwell. So here, example, here's a session. It lasted 130 seconds. We're on this scene for 34 seconds. I'm sorry, the experience was 130 seconds. We're on the scene for 34. The session lasted 86. Lots of information here. So that's Excel. Here's the downside to this use of Excel is it's a snapshot, which means if I want to build tables or charts based off this and then update the data source, I have to rebuild my tables and my charts. This is a snapshot. It would be nicer if you could point to a data feed, a dynamic data source, so that it regenerates your tables and your pie charts, whatever, on the fly. And even with Excel, you can actually do that with a REST-based query. So let's do a new spreadsheet. Here's a new spreadsheet. We'll go back to the experience. This is a query for the account used in this webinar. Data from web. And let's put it, give me a second. I want to paste it right in here. Paste, go. All right, so this query is saying, hey, Data Tracking Hub, give me the following data. See that? And there it is. Let's import it. Click. Okay, I got it. Yes, put it there. Okay. On a surface level, it's the exact same layout, it's the exact same data as the snapshot. The difference is this is a dynamic feed. If I build tables off this and charts, and then under the Data tab, I hit refresh. Not only does it refresh the data feed, but it updates all of the charts and tables based on that feed. Much more convenient. So even in Excel, you could use that web services query to have really dynamic analysis, create your own Excel-based dashboard. Or you have a third party that uses the query. Next, let's talk about Mixpanel as an example of a third party you can work with to analyze your data. And I already have them opened up. Here they are. So with Mixpanel, it takes your data and enables you to filter and sort and create charts and run queries and learn from that data. So for example, here are the frequency of data points. Scene entered, scene left, experience started, experience stopped, guestbook signed. These are familiar, right? Photo scene. And it's, in this case, it's a pie chart telling me how often each of one of these things had happened. They're coming from, remember, they're streaming from the Data Tracking Hub, and Mixpanel has a live view. So let's have that load up. Any second. It's not a very live view right now, is it? All right, here it comes. Well, I'm not sure. Oh, here we go. Boy, that took forever. Okay, well, I think it's the screen share partly because it's not that slow otherwise. So these are all of the events coming from the Data Tracking Hub, including what you and I just did. See this 6 minutes ago, 8 minutes ago? That's us right now, pumping in. Another nice feature of Mixpanel is it has a notion of a dashboard. These are reports that are updated dynamically. You could open them in a web browser, even stream them to a TV, and you get this live view. So as new data comes in, these reports are updated. Mixpanel lets you do that. So we have no formal relationship with these guys. We don't get money if you work with them. It's just a third party that we respect. They do a good job. We support them natively, and you can see some of the interesting things you can do with it. Next, Google Analytics. You know, it's a little surprising for some people that you could use Google Analytics because, again, if you're familiar with it, you probably know it in terms of websites. But as I mentioned earlier, they did introduce about a year and a half ago the ability to use the exact same analytics tool to work with mobile application data, like an iPad app or something. Well, we're just treating Intuiface experiences as if they were a mobile app, whatever that means, and we can pump data into a Google Analytics property. And with that data, you can then treat it as if it were just another mobile app or website. One of the unique aspects of what analytics brings to the table is this notion of behavior flow. Because remember, they think in terms of sequences, right? A website, first, second, third, fourth. They think in those terms, so the notion of a flow is very native to Google Analytics. And so you can very easily identify where do people start, where do they go next, where do they go third. It can just automatically generate these reports, and you can filter based on sessions to get a sense for what the majority likes to do. What is their typical visiting order, and what does that mean to you? Is that good? Is that bad? Do you want to change it or whatever? So this is an example of the kind of interesting views you can automatically generate with Google Analytics. All right, data tracking plans. It's the last thing we have to discuss. Remember, Composer can generate an unlimited number of data points. You do pay for the number of data points generated by player, by all of the players in your account. For free, all of the players in your account can collectively generate 1,000 data points each month. So the next month you start over. If you need to generate and collect more than 1,000 data points per month, the first plan, the project plan, that's 25,000 data points per month, shared by all of the players in your account. It's paid annually, 1,000 annually, but it works out to 84 per month for 25,000 data points per month. Don't worry, you pick a low plan, we give you heads up, we let you upgrade, so that's never a problem. And remember, you define a data point other than experience started and stopped, and optionally, seen, entered, and left. Every single data point is generated because you wanted it to be generated, so you control the number of data points that are created. It's up to you to decide whether or not to be verbose or stingy, and whether you have one experience generating 5 data points over an hour or 25,000 data points, right? You control that, in combination with the number of devices in the field and how often they're being used. By the way, this model is not unusual. Any analytics platform, it's sort of a data point approach. So there's nothing unusual here. You don't have to use data tracking, but if you do, this is how it works. You buy a plan that reflects the number of data points collectively across all your players you want to track in a given month. Okay, to finish things off, I like to propose some questions one can answer thanks to data tracking. The very fact that you're watching this webinar implies you have a good sense of its value. Nevertheless, I do think it's eye-opening to hear about some of the questions that are answerable. One of the nice things about data tracking is it has ROI built in, return on investment. This is how you really measure the results of that investment and say, what are we getting out of it? This insight into your users, into your shoppers, into your clients and prospects is so actionable and so important that it pays for itself. Retail. Which stores have the most interactive signage use? Which product generated the most interest on a rainy day? What is the percentage of loyalty card holders who have browsed? What is the gender split for kiosk users? This is actionable, important stuff. Insights you may not have dreamed of having before because you're only using static signage. And there's no way to know for sure. With interactivity, you know exactly what those people are doing, and you can learn a lot about them, their preferences, and how it relates to their environment and who they are as a person. Sales presentation, a sales pitch. How many times was the pitch delivered? How much time was spent delivering the pitch? Which topics were most discussed with the prospect? What feedback does the presenter have to share? This is nice to know. You got 50 reps out there with the pitch. How often are they using it? What do they show? What are they not showing? And do they have any feedback? Maybe there's like a guest book at the end of the sales pitch, but it's for the rep. And they can fill in some notes and impressions, and that's available for posterity. Trade shows. How many leads were collected during the first day? What were the most popular videos? What was the average idle time for various times of day? What share of sessions were run by staff versus self-service? You know, one of the reasons to invent an interactivity is to create a self-service environment so you don't have to be talking to everybody. If you have 3 people in the booth plus 3 interactive displays, that's 6 conversations, not 3 conversations. So wouldn't it be nice to know if it's actually being used that way and how often it's being used and what's being done when it's being used that way to make sure you're getting a return on your investment and to make sure you do a better job next year. Not to mention you can just do things like collect leads. Just do it yourself. Exhibits like at a museum. What were the most popular videos or topics? What is the average length of a session? How many members identified themselves? What feedback do visitors have to share? Again, as a museum, wouldn't you like to know these things? You've invested in digitizing your exhibits. Which ones are the most popular and the least popular? Maybe you should replace the least popular ones with something else. How long are people dwelling? Is it long or short? If it's short, what can you do to keep them there longer and justify that investment? Whatever. Hospitality. What is the most popular menu item on a weekday? Which of the promoted restaurants is most often selected on a rainy day? Which tourist destination gets the least number of queries? Which partner ads generated the most views and requests for an email? Yes, you could run your own ad platform with Intuiface because you know what people are touching. And you can quantify that and bill third parties based on how often their ads are selected. You can also judge which ads are never selected. Maybe you need to swap them out for a new vendor. Or even just insights about local attractions. Nobody ever cares about this attraction. Why are we showing it? Let's maybe put something else up there so that the value of the kiosk itself is increased. I hope you get the idea of how deep you can really go and how actionable it becomes. It's not a nice to have, it's almost a must have because look what you can do with it and how are you better off in ignorance. And it's not hard. I understand it's the first time you've looked at it, but it's not hard. This is easy stuff. I mean, while demoing it, it took me 5 minutes, to build up a bunch of data points. Once you know what you're doing. And to help you, not only is there this webinar, which is recorded, by the way, so you can watch the recording, but we've documented a lot of the, pretty much every aspect of the data tracking feature. If you go to our knowledge base or online library, there are 24 articles that tell you everything you need to know about data tracking with a really good search engine. So there's just no excuse. I mean, all the information is there. You just have to play with it. That's all. You just have to play with it. To help you, we have prepped some of the free samples in the marketplace. So there are 4 samples in the marketplace. You see them here that were designed to generate data points. Remember, if you're using Composer, you're not consuming a limit. You can generate as many data points as you want. And these 4 samples will do just that. Open them up, see how we did it, steal the idea, do whatever you want, but these will give you a good sense of how to make it work with both locally sourced content or even dynamically accessed content. So that's it. That's the 45-minute introduction to a feature that I think you could be using forever with Intuiface. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to